Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for that warm welcome. I've just come here straight from Belfast, where the last big go public meeting was taking place. But just perhaps a few words about the context of what's going on right at the moment in this country. There is only one game in town, and it is the referendum that's going to take place on the 23rd of June. And what is absolutely without doubt is if it had not been for UKIP and UKIP's People's Army, this would never, ever have happened. And I think we can be very proud of our contribution. Now, the Prime Minister took it some reaction when I mentioned the Prime Minister. Thank you. Come on, liven up, for goodness sake. That comes later. The Prime Minister genuinely thought that when he came back with this carefully crafted deal, that his friends in the newspapers would say, for he's a jolly good fellow. But what he got was an enormous raspberry and a big thumbs down. So what he tried to do then was to tell us that whatever he got was legally binding. Do you remember? Legally binding. And when it turned out that actually he simply wasn't telling us the truth, and then he was rather surprised when he saw that Michael Gove and Boris Johnson decided to back the Leave camp. And isn't that great news that we've got people like that? But I think what's really shocked him, and in some ways perhaps it shocked me, is that if you remember back over 20 years to the Maastricht debates, when 26 backbench Tory MPs opposed the government at third reading, when 26 of them did that, it was considered to be the biggest split in the Conservative Party since the Corn Laws, going back to the 1840s. Well now, to the shock of Mr Cameron, and to the delight of all of us in this movement, there are now 140 MPs that are backing out. And so they've gone, the Remain campaign, or the Romanians, as we should call them hereafter. I talked about Romania a couple of years ago, it caused a bit of trouble, didn't it? But anyway, there we are. I wasn't wrong though, was I? I wasn't wrong, you remember that? I said 50,000 a year would come, and Nick Robinson humiliated me on the national news by saying that only half a dozen had turned up. Well, it was, in fact, 52,000 that came last year, and that's if you believe the official figures, which, given that the number of national insurance numbers issued is triple that, I don't. I think we're being lied to about the true numbers of people that are coming into our country. Anyway, the Romanians realised they had a massive problem. And what they have done in the first 2 weeks of this referendum campaign is literally to throw every single scare story that could possibly exist at the public. You know, we've been told there'd be massive tariffs on our goods. We've been told that food prices would go up. We've been told that millions of jobs would be at risk. We've been told that any Brits living on the Costa del Sol will be rounded up, herded together and put on trains and sent back to Britain. I mean, every single scare story they can possibly think of, they've thrown at us. Now, what I know is this. If you're taught to fire a machine gun, what you do is you fire it in short bursts of 3 or 4 rounds at a time. If you do it that way, actually you've got effective fire. But in their panic, what the Romanians have done is they pulled the trigger on the machine gun, and after the first few rounds go, what happens is the gun runs away from you and the rounds all go over the target. And I believe they fired every single bullet that they've got. There is nothing more they can say, other than perhaps we may hear from the Prime Minister in the weeks to come that if we vote to leave, a plague of locusts will descend upon our country. I don't know. I don't know. And and they talk about a leap into the dark, and they talk about uncertainty. Well, let me give you one absolute certainty, that if we vote to leave this political union, we will once again be an independent, self-governing, democratic nation. That's the certainty. And as for the arguments about trade, the arguments that they wouldn't buy our goods, well, my advice to you would be, don't listen to a bunch of over-promoted college kids who've never had a job in their lives and who don't know how the world works. You know, before I was in politics, I actually had a proper job. How about that? And for 20 years I worked in international trade, and I know how markets work, and I know how the world works. And there is no other part of the world where the fiction is presented that in order to buy and sell goods from each other, you need to be in a political union. Nowhere else in the world does that exist. Nowhere else in the world does the fiction exist that in order to buy and sell goods from each other, you have to have the total free movement of people. Nowhere else in the world does that exist. And actually, if you look out, if you look out of your window on any day of the week and just see how many German motor cars there are on our streets, you could even look at the number of Spanish bottles of wine that were ordered on my table last night in Belfast, to realise that we are now trading with the European Union countries at a deficit that is now ballooning out of control. The deficit actually is £89 billion for the last trading year. And what that means, folks, is they need us far more than we need them. And as Digby Jones, the former Director General of the CBI, has said, he said we could negotiate a trade deal very quickly with the European Union because the German car manufacturers would demand nothing less. All right? But these arguments, it's difficult to get these arguments out there because what the government have done is effectively to mute the civil service, to make them all support the Remain campaign. And how extraordinary that just yesterday, when John Longworth, who's the boss of the British Chambers of Commerce, said in his own personal opinion, the British economy would be freer and we become richer if we left the European Union, and we learned this morning that he's been suspended from his job. Well, shame on them, is all I can say. And if Mr. Longworth wants to fill in the next few months, he can come and share a platform with me anywhere in the country. That should get the journalist beating down his door this afternoon, shouldn't it? Now, our argument is completely the opposite to the one that is being put by Cameron and the Remainians. They are arguing that Britain isn't big enough. They are arguing that Britain isn't strong enough. In fact, we even saw the sight of the Prime Minister standing next to the French President who was being rude about our country. And somehow that's what Cameron wants. He wants you to think that we're no blooming good. Because what they mean when they say we're not big enough, what they mean when they say we're not strong enough, what they mean is they don't think we are good enough. Well, I think we're good enough. Do you think we're good enough? Yeah. Well, of course we're good enough. Of course we're good enough. And when the Prime Minister said, he said, with this deal, you know, when he came back from Brussels with a piece of paper, it's happened before, hasn't it? Yeah. He said, with this deal, I would now vote for Britain to join the European Union. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine the scenario? That David Cameron, if we weren't members of the Union, and David Cameron said now on June the 23rd, we've got this referendum and it represents a fantastic opportunity for this country. I want us to vote to join the European Union. Oh, I know we've managed pretty well for the last 1,000 years, but I think actually it would be better. It's not three feathers, is it? Oh, thank God for that. Thank you very much. There we are. Oh, did she really? It was very good of her. Thank you. There we are. Be knitted for me. Hand knitted for me. So I'll wear it. And can you imagine saying that we're going to join a union that means we'll lose our independence? We're going to join a union that will now make 75% of our laws. We're going to join a union whose court in Luxembourg, which is not even staffed by proper judges, will overrule our own Supreme Court. We're going to abolish border controls completely, and we're going to say to 508 million people, any one of you that wants to come to Britain can, and we've got this wonderful health service that you can share, and we'll educate your children. Can you imagine saying we're going to give away our territorial fishing waters? Can you imagine saying that for all of this we'd pay a membership fee of £55 million a day? I think I know what the result would be, don't you? No! I think I know what the result would be. And that is the situation we're in. We've got a government supported by the big banks like Goldman Sachs, supported by the giant multinationals, supported by many of the non-governmental organisations where people have earned big inflated salaries and pensions out of money that comes from Brussels, our money that comes from Brussels. So we have the vested interests in this country that wish us to remain in, and they're prepared to tell any lie they need to maintain the status quo for themselves. And our job is to overturn it, and to overturn it with the truth, but to overturn it by being self-confident about who we are as a people, and to engage with a bigger, broader, and actually rather more exciting world that exists beyond the fortress of the European Union. And we must say that the very first place we'd like to start are that group of 54 countries who share a common language and a shared history, and the sooner we're freed from these bounds and we can re-engage with the Commonwealth, the better it will be. Now, there's been some talk and some speculation about splits in the Leave camp. Well, actually, there are quite a lot of splits in the Remain camp. You know, Nicola Sturgeon, charming as ever. That couldn't go wrong in Bristol, could it? Nicola Sturgeon has said to David Cameron, please don't come north of the border, we will campaign on our own to remain in the EU. Hilary Benn has said that he won't share a platform with any Conservatives. So actually, the Remain camp have their splits, but yes, it is true, there has been a bit of a division within the Leave camp. There are two competing groups trying to get this designation. One is a group called Vote Leave, based in Westminster, very heavily Conservative, and the other is Go, Grassroots Out, and you see, I think Nathan was sporting one of their luminous ties. And I have tried my damnedest to get these two groups to work together. But the Conservative group will not work with anybody else. And the reason, frankly, is that whilst they may want to win this referendum, they're thinking more about who becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party or their careers and positions within it. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't give a damn what happens to the Conservative Party. I care what happens to this country. And so we as a party are backing Grassroots Out. Last night was the fourth big public event that has taken place around the country. We've got one coming up in Weston-super-Mare in a couple of weeks' time, which you'll all be informed about. And we've put together the biggest alliance of left and right that's probably ever been seen in British politics. You know, we had on the platform last night in Belfast the DUP, a party with a harder line view, the TUV, we had Kate Hoey from the Labour Party, myself from UKIP. We've even had George Galloway appear on a platform. And whatever you think of him, many in UKIP don't like him, but the fact is, he's the only person in the Eurosceptic movement that can talk to a large Muslim population in this country. So we've put together this alliance, and we don't want to spend much time in SW1 in Westminster. We want to spend our time out there campaigning. And today is the first action day for Go, and as we speak, there are 500 campaigning action points up and down this country. How's that? And we couldn't even satisfy the demand, and we're hoping next Saturday there'll be 1,000 street stalls and campaigning points out there all over this country. You know, we in UKIP, the People's Army, because that's what we are an absolutely vital component in winning this referendum. We must get together and work with activists from the other political parties under that grassroots out umbrella. We must deliver through doors tens of millions of leaflets, but crucially, we must be out there in the high streets, having conversations with people, talking to people, making sure they don't believe the smears and the fears that are put out by the establishment. We can win this referendum. We can beat the political class. We can turn the course of history in this country, but I need every one of you to commit to getting involved, to helping. It's about talking to people. It's about persuading people. It'll be about, in May, getting posters in windows and all the rest of it. This is our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get our country back. And I say that because I genuinely feel and believe that we have been betrayed by our political class, who on a succession of lies that began with the common market have given away everything that generations in this country have held dear, given away everything that generations in this country actually fought and sacrificed much for. What I do know is that if we vote to remain, we'll vote to remain inside a political union that will go on legislating. We'll vote to remain inside a union whose currency will continue to fail. We will stay within a union whose migration policy sadly will mean that huge numbers of people, displaced people, will come to Europe, but amongst them there will be extremists and jihadi fighters. And you know, when the boss of Europol says there are now 3,000 to 5,000 jihadi fighters in Europe who have come in using the migrant route as cover, and when the Commander-in-Chief of NATO this week says Europe faces a massive security problem in the future, then I think we have to go out and explain to British people by the million that the safest and most sensible thing to do is to take back control of our country, to take back control of its borders, and to do everything we can to stop bad people coming into our country. That is the safe, common sense answer. And by the way, if we stay in this union, it's a union, and there'll be a debate on Monday, it's a union that Turkey will be a member of within 5 years. So if you think net migration figures coming into Britain now are wholly unacceptable for the cohesion of our society, the wages of average workers, let alone the appalling crisis we face with primary school education and the National Health Service, if we vote to remain, you ain't seen nothing yet, all right? And that's an absolute fact. So let us brace ourselves for the next 4 months. The referendum will dominate, but we'll also, at the same time, of course, have elections to the Scottish Parliament elections to Stormont, elections to the Welsh Assembly, and elections to the London Assembly. And I can tell you that I'm the only party leader who is going to stand there on May the 6th having won seats in all 4 of those assemblies, because we will. Because we will. And at the same time, we're fighting the police and crime commissioners. We've got 2 parliamentary by-elections. We've got hundreds of council seats. I mean, it's sort of Britain's version of Super Tuesday, I guess. So we have got more organisationally on our plate as a party with this complex set of elections and with this vital referendum than we've had at any point in the history of this party. And all I can say to you, my People's Army, of whom I'm so enormously proud, is please do everything you can to help us. And I hope and I pray that June the 23rd, 2016 will be UK Independence Day. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now off to a street stall in Thornbury to go and meet the public. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.